a tip from one of the organizations that was going to be present at the march. They had a connection with someone who had run into these people in the past, and so they were kind of like on the lookout for any upcoming events, and then she informed them, and they then messaged me back. On the day of our actual march, the Lauryn, Anna, and I, the host, we all got to the gazebo, and my father, who was also the police liaison, had gotten there just a little bit earlier to help set up our sound equipment for the speakers, and we had a couple of our volunteers and security team there who were talking to the couple of police that were present, because before the host and myself got there, the Proud Boys actually had a event in the park at noon, and so my father and some of our volunteers were actually at the park when they held their event, and so that's actually why the police were already there when we showed up, and it was just a couple of them at the time. And so we arrived, and they said the Proud Boys had already left, and we drove by them marching down the street heading to the Capitol, and so the police were like, okay, it sounds like they seem to be gone now. And so we started setting up our signs and taping and decorating the gazebo and everything was fine. More volunteers were showing up. We had some people with signs taking pictures. We had a giant banner that we ordered for all of our participants to sign that said "Forever Notorious" on it, in honor of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsberg, which was really the whole purpose of our march, was just to honor her legacy and to march for women's rights. And before we could even start our event, we were just playing Taylor Swift music and dancing around and just having fun and enjoying each other's company and waving to people as they entered. And then all of a sudden we look over, and Wooldridge Square Park, the gazebo is kind of set in a little valley in the park, and so there's these hills that you have to kind of hike over and to come inside to the park. And we saw the Proud Boys and their whole group just start marching down the hill straight to our gazebo. So they just marched straight down the hill. They didn't even go around the sidewalks or the walkways or anything. So it just seemed very aggressive and jarring to see this giant group of armed, large men in tactile gear just marching towards women dancing to Taylor Swift in a public park at a gazebo. And all of a sudden they were just there, and I turned up the music, and my father and some of our other security volunteers tried to keep them off of the gazebo just by standing, putting their hands out. No hands were laid on anybody, but they were trying to just block the walkway to get onto the gazebo, but there was just too many Proud Boys, and so they just barreled right through them, pushed them over, and then rammed us straight up into the railing. And was the few volunteers that we had and friends and family that were on the gazebo with us when it happened. If you were on the gazebo when the Proud Boys stormed it, you were stuck there. We had to hop over the front railing just to, get out of the gazebo to start our march. And so before we knew it, they were yelling Trump 2020, they were screaming in our faces, and I just decided to pass the music so the audience couldn't hear all the terrible things that they were saying. And we tried to just continue and move our event on from there, but we were harassed, we were yelled at, you know, a lot of sexual harassment as well, because we were dancing, trying to ignore them. But of course they decided to harass us instead, unfortunately. And so Anna got a hold of me as we were starting to get a little bit more concerned for our safety on the gazebo. And she looked at me and she's like, "We got to march now." I was like, "Yeah, I think you're right." And so we grabbed all of our stuff and we just decided to start marching just to get away from that conflict. But unfortunately, no matter where we went in the park for the rest of the day, the Proud Boys followed.
They didn't just stomp on us. They were pushing us. They physically, like, were pushing us around in the gazebo, shoved us to the very edge of the railing, like Mady was saying. They were being very aggressive. Whenever I tried to leave the gazebo to start the march, they formed like a barrier, you know, of like all these men in tactile vests and gear with all their like weapons on them. And I was like, move.
I'm gonna kind of like give y'all like some examples of like what we were hearing in the gazebo. You know, they were telling us to take our clothes off. They were telling us to shake our asses. They were saying they would throw their money at us if we gave them a dance. Like, it was really like, it was sexual harassment.
I'm looking at you right now. I'm ignoring idiots who are misinformed behind me. So let's go. I did show up. I showed up to give a speech. And I'm doing it right now, bitch. Alright, so for some of them, for some of you guys in front of me, I'm so proud of you and hope you stay with it. Alright guys, he likes me. So happy for his opinion. Anyway, bye guys. Thank you so much. I'm so proud of you. And you're way bigger than most of the people here.
It's super important to mention that not only did they confront speakers, they also confronted all the children that were there at the event, which was, I think, what really got to me more than anything, particularly because one of the children they approached was my little brother. When they were sexually harassing us on that pavilion in the gazebo, my brother was right next to me the whole time. The only reason my gut reaction was to try and get him out of that situation, but then I realized I wouldn't have eyes on him. So I kept him there with me. But unfortunately, that meant he heard a lot of really terrible things about his sister that he wished he didn't have to hear. And, you know, at one point, they turned around a man in full tactical gear with mace like strapped onto his chest, turned around to my father and my little brother, and he yelled at my dad, you know, "Why in the world would you," he used much more colorful language, but for the sake of an interview, I'm going to say, he said, "Why in the world would you bring a kid to an event like this?" And of course, my father responded with, "Why would you bring weapons to an event like this?" You know, and then also the worst one that I heard was when it was at the very end, we were trying to wrap up, trying to go. There was a little girl who was having a great time dancing with everybody else on the gazebo, and she was having a great time, and you could tell she was really excited to be on the stage that speakers were on earlier. And so I was encouraging her, and she was super sweet. And then I also realized that the Proud Boys were kind of approaching her more so. So in an effort to also encourage her, but also get her away from the Proud Boys that were on the gazebo, I said, "Here, take my hand. Do you want to come dance with me?" And I led her over to the front of the gazebo and let her on the chair that I started dancing on at the very beginning of the march. And I was like, "Here, you can dance here. Have a great time. You know, we're going to keep packing up." And she was having a great time. But for some reason, they assumed that she was my daughter at that point. I don't know why, but there was some men that were Proud Boys that were filming, and they were trying to interrogate me about, you know, if it was my daughter or not. I didn't respond to anything they said, but what I did hear was, well, if that's her daughter, we should just I'm going to preface this with, this is a horrible thing, but if this is her daughter, we should just kill her daughter right now and knock her off the chair and kill her now. If she is pro-abortion, we should just kill her daughter for her now. It wasn't my daughter, still horrible, horrible, horrible thing to hear. And also my little brother also heard that as well, and that really should come up. They were extremely confrontational. They didn't care who you were, if you were a speaker, if you were a marcher, host, or just someone who was walking by the park. You know, they confronted everyone who was there. I definitely heard them scream some very unseemly things at Wendy Davis and Julie Oliver and the women officials, you know, terrible things like baby killer, and, you know, they screamed those things at us too. So they said plenty of things, and unfortunately it did get physical at one point, but luckily the only assault that only aggressive assault that we are aware of that happened was with my father, and that was only because he was standing on that front line in between our marchers and the speakers. So we definitely had some confrontation for sure, and he tried to report it to the police, but when he asked the policeman, did you guys see that? Are you gonna see that? Can I report this? The policeman who saw everything just looked at him and said, you know, there are two sides to every story, and left it at that. And, you know, we realized that it's like, okay, we're on our own here, but we're tough. And, you know, he was such an ally in the sense that he was like, I'll be the one to get hit if it means that you guys can keep speaking. And unfortunately that was the case, but I'm glad that it didn't escalate to anything past that.
Is something that we want to, you know, bring light to, because a lot of times women aren't believed, and we had so many witnesses that day. And like we were saying, like the people who were supposed to help us, the police, they didn't help. They just watched and took pictures. And when they did call us over, they were getting like really just in the weeds about like permits and things like that, which we had already worked with the city and gotten approval and not needed permits. Like we had done everything right for this event. And it's just, I know that we're, you know, very privileged white women, but like it was very eye-opening to look to an agency that's supposed to keep the peace and protect us, and they like had no interest in doing that. And so that was kind of a very eye-opening experience, I think, for us too. When we were tipped off, we decided to reach out to the National Women's March organization, which is basically like the umbrella organization for all of the marches that day. And so we let them know, like, hey, we've gotten a tip that there's going to be some opposition at this event. We're frankly really nervous about it and want to be prepared. And so we got on a call with a local director. He got on a Zoom call with us, and we told her kind of what our plan was and what we've heard and what we had done with the information we had received. And so she, her job was actually to work in these kind of crisis situations. and to prepare people for these types of opposition. And so she gave us some really great feedback, and we got a really awesome plan together. I don't think any of us expected to have to use that plan, but I'm so glad that we did that training. So what we ended up, you heard a little bit about what our de-escalation training entailed. So we talked about what would happen if indeed the gazebo was taken over, because we had heard like that was their target, was to take over the stage. And so we, said, okay, well, we can stay on the stage as long as we can be heard, which was not very long. And then at that point, the best form of like defense against them would be to start marching, get ourselves out of that situation, get all of our people with us, and do what we had come there to do, which was to march. And it was kind of beautiful because we had a pretty large gathering of people. I'd say probably like 350, 400 people showed up with us. And they were all wearing masks, and it was, very safe. But we did our march. We did probably 2 laps of the entire park. And what was really beautiful was that from like one end to the other of the sidewalk was completely filled with marchers. So there was a point where the entire park was surrounded by Women's March attendees, and there was just a little group in a gazebo of Proud Boys. So that was pretty powerful to be able to be a part of that. And I felt like we really got to take back like what was ours, which was this march. And so we kind of pulled over once Wendy Davis appeared, and we gave her a megaphone. We got her up on the park bench, and she started her speeches. And I remember turning around because it was just, we really like had to be resourceful in that moment and adaptable. And so I started turning around. All of a sudden I saw Julie Oliver, I saw Pooja Sethi, I saw Selena Avarenga. And so it's just like all of our speakers showed up at the perfect time. And it was such great timing because they could all just go one by one up on the bench, and everyone was able to hear them through like a train of megaphones. We were able to like get everyone's speech across the crowd. We had a radio station show up and record all the speeches, and I listened to it on Friday, and you can still what's really awesome is you can hear all of our speakers way louder than you can hear any of the opposition. So I think we still achieved what we wanted to do.
Because we had our megaphones, we were louder, and we were just focused on all of our speakers had amazing things to say and such great speeches, so motivational. So we were able to just kind of, tune them out. And our speakers were amazing. They were just saying like, people like this is why we got to keep voting, and women win elections. And if we all do our part, and just keep fighting, and saying opposition just proves you're doing something worth fighting for. So it was still a really motivational event, which we really liked. And of course we had like already said, like the whole thing was going to be nonviolent. We are not doing anything violent at all, nothing aggressive. That was like our position, of course, because we weren't there for violence. We were there to spread love, not hate, and talk about feminism and more in RBG.
For me, the whole event was really just proof of what can happen when women support other women. And particularly the 3 of us, none of us knew each other before this.
I just think it was a great display of intersectional feminism, and like Mady was saying, how women can come together and support each other and lift each other up, which is really ties back to the main point of the whole event, you know, which was to celebrate feminism.
It really just helps solidify how much power women can have at the polls for me this election cycle, personally in my own life, and then also just seeing that, you know, Texas women are way more powerful than people give them credit for.
I kind of keep going back to Julie Oliver. When she was speaking, she spoke directly to a mom and her daughter, and she told her, you know, I want you to run for office one day, and I'll come block walk with you. Like I will help you with your campaign. It was so impactful and so empowering to watch a candidate, you know, for Congress actually like address normal people in a crowd, and to be a young girl and her mother, and it was a Black mother and a Black daughter, which was even more important, you know, to tell her that she could run for office one day and that she would throw all of her support behind her. Like all girls need to hear that. One of our speakers, Anna Sweeney, who's a transgender woman, she just sent the nicest email and was like so proud of us and was like, y'all handled it so well. And she's like, this was your first time, but you did an incredible job against, like, all the odds were against this and you guys still came out victorious. And she was like, so she's like, you've been baptized by fire into organizing and advocacy work. And she just told us that she was very proud of us. And we've gotten some other responses from our speakers that said similar things. And it's helped us, I think, to feel good about the event. We've been there for each other too. And it's been really great to hear feedback, especially positive feedback about how this even got people fired up to do more by witnessing this event.